Okay, let's talk about the backswing today, okay? A powerful backswing position is true to a degree. Your power is going to come from the rotational aspect of your downswing. I understand that, but it can equally go wrong in the backswing position. And there are probably three things that we need to talk about today about the backswing that you have to ensure that you do to give yourself the best chance of sequencing the downswing. Right, first one's first, let's understand the simplicity of getting the weight in towards the right heel. You need to get the weight in towards the right heel as you go back, because based on the idea that you're going to be triggering a rotation of the hips, a rotation of the shoulders, it's relatively easy to get the weight into the right heel, but it's amazing how many people don't. Now, what happens if I get the weight, say, on the outside part of my foot? It suggests that I'm creating too much of a slide. If the weight goes more onto my toes or onto my left-hand side, it suggests that I'm drifting forward instead of rotating back and getting them back correctly. It's a really simple tip, right? Get the weight in towards the right heel will give you a great indication that you're triggering a decent hip rotation, but it will also give you a good indication that your hips are staying in posture as opposed to drifting forward. The reason why it's important to get the weight on the right heel is basically it's easier to open up your hips, okay? So it's easier to trigger an opening on this left-hand side if you don't have much weight on it. I'm going to talk about that in more detail in the upcoming weeks, but my point is that if there's too much weight on this left-hand side at the top of the backswing, then all of a sudden you're going to struggle to open up the hips as much. And it's important that you understand that actually as soon as you start to initiate this downswing move, this is where most of your hip rotation is going to happen at its fastest. This is a really important thing that you understand. It's going to be easier to do it and to start to opening up your hips without shifting too much pressure too soon, but also more importantly for this video, making sure you don't have any weight on this left-hand side. You have to get the weight in towards the right heel for both of those reasons. One, the indication of the hip rotation, so you're staying in posture, and two, it's going to be easier for you to start to open up your lower body if you don't have any weight on that left-hand side. Now, when I work with people on a one-to-one basis, they'll, through a few little exercises and drills, they'll start to get this sort of feeling. Now, the problem that we have is that they start to operate maybe a little bit too flat, because as soon as you start to trigger a sense of hip and shoulder rotation, it's easy for your arms to start to get dragged too much behind your body. So the problem with this, right, is that basically, and I know a few of you don't like the concept of checkpoints, right, in terms of positions, but I have to disagree with you in terms of from the learning perspective. I'm going to do some videos on course management and how to play your way around a golf course, and I completely agree that you have to play on feel. I don't disagree with that. But obviously this channel is fundamentally designed to help people make swing changes to their game. That's what I'm doing. And therefore you have to understand positions in your golf swing. Now, probably the most important position, in my opinion, would be when your left arm horizontal coming down here, right? Because at this stage, the hips should be parallel towards the target. This is when you should have triggered a lot of that hip rotation. And this is an important move that you get. And the reason why is because without this move, you can't drive the elbow forward. Without this move and you start moving forward, the whole sequence goes wrong. And what's going to happen in this stage is this is where you're going to be rotating really quick. And the problem is that if you get this sequence wrong, and let's say you don't open up your hips till later in the swing, then you're out of sequence. Because what should happen at this stage is that from here, you should start to create a thrusting motion and that right hip would start to come forward in the hit. And if you can't get yourself into that position, then you're going to be in a mess. Now, coming back to our backswing, the problem that you have is that if I can only get to left arm horizontal going back, well, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to be able to trigger enough lower body rotation to initiate the downswing. And therefore, you're always going to be getting a little bit kind of slidey, a little bit hip thrusty, a bit stuck and a bit flippy. Because that's the fundamental reason why people create a hip extension is through a lack of rotation. So the question now is then, okay, how are you going to create leverage? Well, the sole focus of the right arm is to push up. That's all it's doing, okay? The right arm is basically just not doing anything in the backswing. The left arm is creating an element of rotation so the shaft can stay on plane. The right arm is there to push you up. So that's an important thing to be able to understand in this backswing position, is that if you do start to swing too flat and too round, my point is from here, you're going to struggle to initiate a correct downswing. So you have to give yourself leverage, because basically it's buying you more time. Yeah, if I can swing my hand or my arm on a higher plane, it means that I have more time to initiate the downswing rotational move. So it's important that you understand that your right arm is serving as a focus to lifting the club up in the air. Now, some of you have asked questions, and again, I'm creating more specific content about these areas, but what do you do if you're physically limited? Well, the first thing you do is you allow, on the backswing, you allow your knee to come more into the center of your stance. So you allow the left heel to lift, right? Now, I've seen a couple of videos recently where they've suggested, a couple of videos that I've seen of other pros where they've said that you keep the toe in the air. And this comes to mind because a few people have commented on the channel about this as well. That's not true, right? When you swing back, whether you lift the heel in the air or not, the weight will be in the right heel and between the left toe. That's how it works, because obviously my right hip's going back, my left hip's coming forward. So therefore there's always going to be an element of weight pressure on my left toe. It's absolutely fine to swing back and to let the left heel come up, but just make sure that your knee's coming into the center of your stance, because it means that it's still helping you push the weight in towards the right heel. That's the first thing to understand, okay? Is that if you've got to get the weight into the right heel, if you can't do it and you feel like all I can do is get to here, well, that's what I'm saying. Allow your knee to come over and then get the feeling that you're pushing your arm more in the air, and then from there you're going to be able to create more leverage. Now, a great little drill, and I've talked about this on the channel before, and one was like the analogy of picking up the bucket, but the other one is the split handle exercise. So if I start to hold the club out in front of me like so left hand facing down, right hand facing up, and all I'm going to do is I'm basically just going to kind of get the feeling that my right arm is pulling my left arm in the air. And again, for our more limited golfers, what you're going to do is you're just going to allow the knee to come across and just make sure you can feel the weight going into the right heel going back. And what this is going to teach you is how to get the club higher if you're somebody who is physically limited and struggling to do it. What you should find is that the thing that helps you also create leverage, and you'll do this naturally with this exercise, is that you'll create an element of spine extension. So a spine extension is kind of, in a subtle approach, is kind of this motion. And it's exactly the same sort of move that would help you create leverage. I've done it before, like I mentioned earlier with the bucket analogy. If you were to pick a bucket up, you wouldn't stay in this kind of spine angle, you know, you wouldn't stay in flexion in this way because you can't lift your arm up. You would naturally create an element of extension to help you lift up. And that's what this split handle exercise is teaching you. It's teaching you a couple of things. One, the arm is pulling the left arm up. And two, it's naturally going to be creating an element of spine extension, which means that you're staying over the ball, but it's also going to help you create a decent amount of leverage in the backswing. So my final point is just that you need to get a feeling that you are in the left. I would focus on the left hand. You're getting the feeling that you are pushing the club away from you. Okay? Now, some people will suggest that this helps you keep the left arm straight. I would agree with that as well. But the other thing that it does is what you'll see from here is, let's say I just lift the club up like so. There'll always be an element of bend in the left arm, but you can see the way this is more pronounced. Now, if I get the feeling that I'm basically pushing the club away from me, so I'm increasing the pressure on the actual club itself. So imagine the club is now a wall and I'm trying to push into the wall. Now, what starts to happen is a couple of things, right? One, my left arm would stay straighter, which will help your swing out, right? The left arm in theory can stay constant in terms of its width. It's obviously going to increase your chances of striking the ball consistently as opposed to maybe getting too bent. But I wouldn't get too hung up on that. But the other thing that starts to happen is that if you put pressure into the club, it allows the left shoulder blade to move around more. Now, again, we'll talk about this in more detail in upcoming weeks as well, but when you think about it, what's happening in the backswing reference the shoulders is my right shoulder blade, as it goes back, is going into an external rotation, which means backwards, and my left shoulder blade is coming around and going into internal rotation, which means it's kind of reaching this way. So this is, again, another good tip for golfers that struggle with rotation, is just maybe you don't understand how the body's actually designed to move. We swing back, and that's why I'm not a massive advocate of this sort of exercise here, placing the club across your shoulders, because what happens is if I do this, that's about as much shoulder rotation as I can create, because the way that I would get further than this is my left arm would reach, which pulls the left shoulder blade around more, which helps me increase that sense of rotation. But it's also helping me keep that left arm straighter. Just to summarise, right, because there's a few things that we've discussed today. Your priority is to get the weight in towards the right heel. You're going to do that through the correct hip rotation. What you want to be careful of is that you don't want to swing on too flat, and you want to make sure you create enough leverage, which is where then I spoke about the idea of pushing the club up in the air. And that's the focus on your right arm, is to push the club up. I then moved on to that split handle exercise and gave you that sense of feeling. When you start to do this split handle exercise, what you'll notice is that your right arm pulls the left arm up, same focus in a golf swing, but what also happens is that it creates an element of spine extension. So that's something that eventually you can start to feel in your backswing, is your spine extension, which will help you create more leverage and going back. It's going to be impossible from this sort of position for you to get your left arm in the air. Then the last point that we started to talk about was applying pressure. And the reason why we're applying pressure to the club is, one, because yes, it can help you keep the left arm straighter, but fundamentally what it's also going to help you do is increase the shoulder rotation. So it's going to help you get the feeling of the left shoulder coming around as the right shoulder goes back. And I think it's important that you understand that, because if you keep doing exercises just like this to try and trigger shoulder rotation, then you're never going to get towards your capacity, because this is stopping my left shoulder from working in this manner. And that's why that split handle exercise is really good. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. You know I always appreciate a thumbs up. Got any questions about this video or anything you'd like to see in the future, then that's what that comments box below is for. Prompts a lot of this discussion is that people send the swings into the channel. It's absolutely free for you guys to do this as well, right? The social media links are in the description below. Basically, people are just sending their swings in on a weekly basis. I am just kind of offering some free tips and advice. It's absolutely free. And as much as it's free to press that subscribe button, press the little bell icon. I'll catch up with you in a couple of days.